You have to park in St. Justin's. I'm sure I'll talk to Miss Sudi and it will be okay, just to park there, so you can just walk over. The school's pretty lenient about that stuff, so you can go ahead and park there. All right, so we have a full agenda. I don't know that we're going to get through the entire agenda, but I wanted to create an agenda that that we would get through as much as we could. I'd rather have more on the agenda than not enough, because it has to be on the agenda in order for us to discuss. So the agenda looks pretty full, and it is pretty full, but again, there's a reason for that. I don't want to have to get to an end of a meeting with a half an hour left and nothing else be on the agenda, okay? So I'll go ahead and I've already called the meeting to order, and I need an approval of minutes. Okay? Yeah. Yep.
One of the things last year when we were looking at approval of minutes, and I'm not saying that anybody in this committee is doing that, but last year we were having people approve minutes and hadn't even read them. So I would like to request that you do not read the minutes, abstain from approving it, but approve it if you've read it and you agree with what's in it. Which I think is kind of common sense, but we faced that a little bit last year. So I would second the motion to approve.
Okay.
With one correction, I actually believe it, and I have to go back and check the video, but I know that there was a comment in the minutes saying that reflecting the vote for the chair, and I think the numbers in there was wrong because I believe I was the only one who abstained, and it said that there were 3 abstentions.
There were 3. Actually, Jody abstained, you abstained, and I think Teresa? I think Teresa abstained as well. Steve abstained? Okay. So yeah, there were 3. Yeah, it was, yeah. Okay, no problem. Okay, so we have a motion. Keith seconded by Hussam. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, great. So what I'm going to do, I did want to talk to the group when the city attorney was here, and so I'm going to go ahead and table that until he gets here. But in the meantime, if it's okay with you guys, I'd like to go to district voting method, which is number 6 on the agenda. I'd like to move it up because Rod can start that discussion. So if you're okay with that, we can start there. Unless you want to wait for the city attorney to come, he should be about less than 10 minutes. Are we cool with going to, okay? All right, so the other thing is I need a motion to excuse Steve. Steve will not be here today. Okay, Keith made the motion, Beverly seconded. All in favor? Thanks. Okay, all right, so Rod, why don't you take over district voting method?
The legal portion of it. And much of the reason that you're here is as much a practical issue of the benefits or pros and cons of an election system as it is a legal issue with regards to the California and Federal Voting Rights Acts. From my role as the practitioner, so we're the folks who will actually implement the election system once you guys choose which one you want, and I'll provide some guidance as we go and chime in when we talk about the unanticipated effects of changing voting systems, both pro and con, with regards to all the different options that you're going to look at. That said, my office as the local elections official will implement any system you come up with. As long as it's supported by the registrar's office and the technology is enabled, we'll figure out a way to make that happen. When we talk about pros and cons, it's primarily from an academic point of view and then a practitioner's point of view to add to what will be your robust debate, not to try and guide you in any way, one way or another. So what we'll do right now is, taking out of order, as we know Brian is going to come back and give you some foundational information about the law, just some general outlines about the different election systems. So let's say this is our city, or a city, the city of Silverville. So this city, the primary election system in most small cities across the state is what would be considered a basic at-large system. And that's one where if there are 3 open seats, everybody runs together, and you have a list of folks, and as a voter goes into the ballot box and they determine who they're going to vote for, they can vote up to 3 times. So say they pick, this person, and this person. At the end of the day, all those get tallied, and the 3 people on this list who got the highest number of votes are the people who are chosen to be city council members. In most small cities, these are done as or can be done as a plurality. They're done in a November election cycle, usually without a runoff in June, or usually without, a primary in June and then a runoff in November. And that's the kind of general basic election system you find in almost every city in Santa Clara County, and in fact, across the state. It's the predominant election system. City of Santa Clara is a little bit different in that we run citywide, but we run by seat. It's an at-large by seat system. So you would have, say, these folks running in seat 1, and these folks running in seat 2, and these folks running in seat 3. The highest vote getter in each one of these individual contests then wins. It's a way that folks have to choose kind of what slot they're running for when they run for office. And that's just the context of what a basic at-large system is and what our system is. Everybody here lives in Santa Clara. You guys have seen the ballot, how you're prompted to vote 3 times if there are 3 openings, where if you look at an at-large ballot, it'll simply say, it'll have the list of candidates, and it'll say, vote for up to 3. Districting is different, because say you have the city and you have 6 districts in it. And we'll use a city which happens to have an elected mayor. Those are what folks would be elected at large. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 districts. Each one of these districts, and our city attorney is here. So, Brian, you want a minute to get settled, or shall we? No, we just went out of order a little bit so that we could give you some time to get here. So, with that, would you like to return to the agenda?
Why don't you go ahead and finish this portion?
Great.
Yep. And it'll give the attorney a chance to get settled and keep going.
In fact, Brian, I think this was going to be your portion, so I'm happy to hand it off to you if you'd like. Alternately, I can keep going.
We're on the advantages and disadvantages of districts.
I had just explained what a basic at-large system was, what an at-large by seat system was, and was about to go into the pros and cons of the district system.
Okay, so let's go into the pros and cons of going to districts. Number 1, advantage. We'll put the advantages over here. It pretty much ends CVRA lawsuits. So that's one very primary advantage.
Brian, you're going to have to talk a lot louder.
That's one primary advantage. It may not end the current lawsuit. If we recommend going to districts, we may actually have to go to districts and have an election. But there are people that will continue to sue us if we don't go to districts. I'm pretty convinced of that. Another advantage that's in the materials about going to districts is some people say it's more responsive. Well, if you have fewer voters, and I'm not saying I necessarily think this is true, but if there are fewer voters, then each voter has more influence, is a bigger vote to the person running. In other words, there's fewer people to represent, and therefore that particular representative who's elected by that district has a little bit more influence exercised on them by the voters that are there.
So Brian, can I stop you real quick? If somebody asks a question, can you repeat the question?
Okay.
So folks at home can hear.
Sure.
And then I hate to say it again, but you're going to have to talk a little bit louder.
All right.
Cause
Maybe I
it's hard
need
to
one of
hear you.
those mics that like
Yeah.
is pinned to my collar or something.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay. So the question was, in what way is it more responsive? And my answer was, If there are fewer voters to whom an elected representative is responsible, then each of those voters has a little bit more influence over that representative. One of the other advantages stated in the material is it's cheaper to run a campaign when there's fewer voters to reach. I think that's probably true. Now, I don't want this to be all my show here, so anybody else can think of any advantages to going to districts. That's true. The representative probably knows the area better.
Saskia, talking to the mic. Thanks.
Not necessarily. If you go to districts, does the representative have to live in the area? It really depends, but I'm not 100% certain of California law. I know that certain states, for example, certain states don't require congressional representatives to live in the congressional district. They can just run. They don't necessarily have to live there. I remember when I was younger, Robert F. Kennedy was our senator from the state of New York, and he was not at the time, I don't think when he ran, I don't think he was a resident of the state of New York, but he ran for Senate. But I think in Santa Clara, we would probably want you to be a resident of the district in which you run. But we'll have to look at that if that's where we end up going.
It's not just that it's a cheaper campaign, but it's also that because it's a smaller geographic district, it's more viable for somebody who's running a grassroots campaign to be able to walk precincts and meet people. If you were to look at the city of Santa Clara at 120,000 people, if it was 6 districts, that's 20,000 people, probably 10,000 or so registered voters, right around there, give or take. And if that's the case, then that's much more realistic to walk and to meet people in a meaningful manner than it is to walk precincts if you're talking about doing 120,000 people and roughly 50,000 registered voters.
All right, so we'll keep it open. If anybody wants to mention what they might think is an advantage, we can also start with the disadvantages.
Well, think of another advantage. I'm assuming that, I don't know, is it on? Oh, yeah. I'm assuming that one of the reasons we're looking at the districts is to allow minorities have a greater opportunity to get minority candidates on, because district people, tend to move where there's like ethnic regions or whatever, and that's one of the big things. Is that correct?
Well, we could add that here. Let's just say better representation.
Yeah.
But we haven't really gotten there for Santa Clara yet. Whether we would be able to draw districts that would favor one minority or another.
But weren't you saying at the last meeting that going to districting hasn't proven even that you get a more representative council?
Not necessarily is what I said. I read an article that there have been cities that have gone to districts and it hasn't made much difference. But we'll go over a lot more information about this particular concern here, but I just wanted to get overall what your thoughts were on going to districts versus not going to districts in terms of what you see as Santa Clara voters, what you would imagine the advantages and disadvantages would be. One of the disadvantages, having worked in a city, San Jose, that has districts, is you have what's called, they call it mini-mayor form of government, and what happens is, 1 of the things that 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 happens is, 1 of the th you'll see the phenomenon occur where whoever the council member that represents the district is, the other council members tend to follow their lead with regard to especially zoning decisions within their district. In other words, they feel like, well, you know the representatives and that you're closer to the ground in that district. You know the things that affect that district better. So, you should be the one to kind of take the lead on the motion, and we should follow your motion. It doesn't always happen. They tend to advocate more for the people in their district. They don't care about the voters outside their district. So if you were somebody that wanted somebody to, wake somebody up at City Hall and get a response from you, sometimes when you have districts, they want you to go to your district council member to talk to that person. Of course, here you could always talk to the mayor. One kind of thing at play here is you have to remember in the rules under FPPC are that you cannot participate in the making of a decision if it's a piece of property within 500 feet of your house. Now, Santa Clara may have districts where that might cut a pretty big hole in the district, and so you might have a little bit interesting kind of a phenomenon here in, even though you're going to be more representative of your district, you're going to be completely out of any decisions within 500 feet of your house. So that's one kind of, I don't know whether you want to call it an advantage or a disadvantage, but it is kind of an interplay with the whole mini-mayor phenomenon. Can anyone else think of any?
I don't know if this is related to what you were saying. Hello. I don't know if this is related to what you were saying about the mini-mayor thing, but, the notion of fiefdoms where it's like, I'll vote yes on issues relating to your district if you vote yes on issues related to mine, and I don't give a crap about anything else. And
well, yeah. We could maybe call it leads to horse trading. I don't know.
Yeah. Horse trading is a good word. Better explanation than mine.
I'm going to put a question mark there, because it wouldn't necessarily lead to horse trading. I think, you could definitely have representatives who would not operate that way.
Share a potential con as a lack of access. And when we look at election systems and the pros and cons, we look at one from the voters' interface with the candidates, and the other is from the candidates' interface with the elections system. So we know that a potential benefit of having district elections is that if you can create districts that have a high concentration of emerging minority communities in a town, you have a greater chance of allowing them, if those minorities vote along ethnic lines, to be able to have greater representation. On the con side of that is if you are unable to create that type of a concentrated district, that you may in fact decrease an emerging minority community member's ability to run for office, in that if they're running citywide, they can run for office every 2 years, every cycle. If they're running in a district, they can only run for office at most every 4 years when that seat comes up, and with the hope of not having an incumbent, likely every 8 years, knowing that most people get elected and then run for office for a second term. So there's an issue with regards to a potential pro on the candidate engagement side, on the district side, but also a potential con on the candidate engagement side, depending on how diverse the area is.
Is this on? I'd add under disadvantages to me if we truly think that in any election there are, for example, the three best candidates. In a district election, all three of them might be running in the same district, and only one of them therefore would win, and you would end up with a city council where you in fact didn't have the best candidates winning. You had the best candidates competing against one another because of where they happen to live, and your other seats being filled by whoever happened to run in those districts.
And Okay. In the materials, maybe Rod or Rania could look, there was a section on district elections in the Common Cause. And did we miss any of the ones that they talked about?
I believe you covered them all.
Okay. Yes?
I have another disadvantage, and I know you have it in the advantages, and I would maybe argue with you about that. But hear me out on one of the disadvantages, which is you say it's more responsive. I actually think that having a district could lead to a less responsive scenario where you're only represented by one candidate, or you're only represented in your district by one council member. And if you are in disagreement on a policy issue with that council member, then you really have nobody to represent your voice. Whereas if more than one person represented you, you could at least go and vouch for your policy idea with a different council member that didn't necessarily live in your district. So I look at it from the flip side as to responsiveness of somebody who may not agree with some policy decisions or policy ideas.
I'm not here to agree or disagree with any of these ideas. I'll sure it could. Your point is well taken.
So,
Yes.
so guys, in the interest of time, I think we've done a very good job of discussing both pros and cons. Would it be okay if we kind of move on to the next action item? I think we've kind of discussed this, and I think it's pretty clear the major pros and cons at this point.
I actually just had a question.
Mhm.
That's related to this. I feel like some of this discussion assumed that single-member districts are the only option for districts, but couldn't we have potentially multi-member districts? And then some of these advantages, the disadvantages may flip even.
Yeah, I think that's,
So, like,
I think when
two-
if we get to that discussion
Right.
of, what kind of districts, or then we can certainly relook
We
at
don't
this
need
list.
to have this read discussion.
I think this, we're just laying the issues out on the table, so we have talking points, and we're all kind of covering what we think are the talking points for the district. And then there's going to be other variations on the theme as well. You can have mixed type voting systems where you might have districts with cumulative voting, districts with ranked choice voting. These are other possibilities to discuss, but or districts with 2 members, 2 districts with 3 members. So there are different ways of looking at this.
Can I ask another question, Tino,
Sure.
related to that? And that is, if you have multi-seat districts, like was mentioned, does that end the CVRA lawsuit issue?
No one can ever answer that question because anybody is free to sue for any reason. The only thing that's really going to end the CVRA lawsuit is if we have a city council that ends up being multi-ethnic, somewhat more representative of the population. You can't sue for lack of representation on the council if the council is in fact representative.
Okay.
Other than that, if the council ends up, all one ethnicity, then you're always going to have the opportunity for someone to say, I want to file a lawsuit.
I'm actually aware that Fremont was just sued.
Hold on a second, Hassam. I'm going to go ahead and
So I just had a quick question. Is it all or one? Do you have to go to all the seats going to district, or could you have most of the seats and then allocate 1 or 2 at-large seats?
You can do what you like with a charter city. In fact, I think Oakland does districts, except for 1 council member is elected at large.
Okay.
The question is what will that do for you in terms of getting a more representative council?
Hassam?
Sorry, my comment was, I'm actually aware that Fremont was just sued, or at least there was an intent of suit on Fremont, and their council is extremely diverse, but they were still sued for CVRA. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I don't know
Yeah.
the ins and outs of that one.
Tina,
Yep. Saskia?
I just want to know, how would gerrymandering affect any of this, disadvantages or advantages?
Well-
Because that can occur.
Well, the CVRA has when we go through it, you'll see it has guidelines on how you draw the district. So I would not expect us to have gerrymandering in our process. We would, to the extent that we already looks like there's no real dominant
Right.
minority in any one neighborhood. And so, I think we're probably going to end up drawing districts pretty much geographically even to the population without too much reference to trying to capture this group or that group. So what happens is if you lose if you have a municipality or a state that has a Voting Acts violation under the federal law, then you may at some point have a federal court start drawing what your district look like or be a lot more directive about how your districts look. But we're not in a situation like that here. So we'll just, I think we just need to keep working through the process, and then, you're going to have to start, making your considerations and coming up with recommendations.
Okay, thank you. I had a card here for public comment. We're not going to take public comment on the informative sessions. If we are going to make a decision on something and there's a motion and a second, then we'll go ahead and ask for public comment. But in the meantime, this is just an informative session, so I'd like to move on to 6B, the preliminary direction. Because this is an informative session, we're not taking action on anything, and we agreed last meeting that we would have public presentation and presentation if we were going to make a determination on, or have to make a determination on one of these issues. But right now, this is simply an informative session. During public presentations, you'll be afforded an appropriate amount of time to make your comments. We're not making any decisions right now. This is simply informative. We're simply going through and gathering information. This is an informational session. No decisions are being made. This is just, we've asked the city attorney to provide information to not just us, but to you as well. So there is no decisions, or nothing is being determined. If we get to a point where we're going to determine something based on a motion, then we would have public comment like we would at council. We're not determining anything right now. We're simply gathering information. So until we do make that determination, we're going to continue along this format. And at the end of it, during public presentations, I promise you, you will all have ample amount of time to share your concerns. So if
Can I clarify? Item 11 is part of this meeting, so there is
Yes.
public presentations.
That's what I said. At the end, we will have public presentation.
Thank you.
Yep. So let's go on to 6B, please.
Well, is this on? Okay. I don't think I can do this. What happened to those big long ones? All right. 6B is really for your decision whether you want to make any preliminary decision at this point about whether you're leaning towards districts or not leaning towards districts. I wasn't going to provide you with preliminary direction. I was thinking, do you want to provide us with any preliminary direction on whether, or do you think it's too premature at this point?
So I think before we get to a preliminary direction, which then if we were going to make any decisions, we would include public comment. But I think before we go there, could we go back to laws affecting the election methods?
Sure.
Could we go to number 3 so we can gather more information before we decide if we're going to have preliminary, if we're going to give any direction from a preliminary standpoint?
Sure. Okay, I'm just going to briefly review the California Voting Rights Act because you requested a review. And these are simply the sections of the California Government Code that's known as the California Voting Rights Act. It defines at-large method of election. And that's basically one in which the voters of the entire jurisdiction elect the members of the governing body, and one in which candidates are required to reside within given areas of the jurisdiction, and the voters of the entire jurisdiction elect the members to the governing body. And it's also one that combines at-large elections with district-based elections. Now, district-based elections means a method of electing members to the governing body of a political subdivision in which the candidate must reside within an election district that is a divisible part of the political subdivision and is elected only by voters residing within that election district. So that does answer the question that someone asked about whether someone needs to reside in the district in order for it to meet the definition of district election in California. A political subdivision basically means a city or a county. We are clearly a charter city. And then here's one that's important to our discussion. Protected class means a class of voters who are members of a race, color, or language minority, as this class is referenced and defined in the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965. So it does not include gender, it does not include sexual orientation, it's just simply these types of classes: race, color, or language minority.
On the previous one, you'd mentioned in terms of district that the person running would have to reside within that district. What about like in the way our school board is, or Santa Clara Unified School elections, which is you have to reside in that district, but anybody in the entire voting area, not just within your district, is eligible to, can vote for members who are running in that district. So it's.
I don't really know how they vote, so I mean, this is district elections for purposes of the Voting Rights Act. You can have district elections that may not meet these definitions, but what they mean in the Voting Rights Act is that's what they mean by district elections.
So the candidate must reside in that geographical district, and the people voting for them can only the people residing in that district can vote for that candidate?
Right. It's basically the people in the district, they can only elect someone who lives in that district.
I was just going to clarify. The school district is from district at large. It's from district at large. So you have to live in the district that you want to represent, but it's voted at large.
But it's the school district does not have, may or may not have district elections. It's an at-large system. The school district just happens to be called district. It is a political subdivision. Yeah, right there. School district is a political subdivision that's subject to the Voting Rights Act. So a school district may or may not have districts for purposes of electing its board members.
So when you say they must live in the district, that's where they're registered as a voter, correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
I have one other question, sorry. Is there a time at which they have to, they register and then vote? How does that work? Is there a time limit? Is there a date by which they have to be registered in that house, so to speak? You know what yeah.
I think you probably know a little bit
Yeah.
at the time.
That would be prior to pulling and submitting nomination papers. Yeah.
Okay, and then the Act has a definition of racially polarized voting, and that definition is voting in which there is a difference as defined in case law regarding enforcement of the Federal Voting Rights Act in the choice of candidates or other electoral choices that are preferred by voters in a protected class, and in the choice of candidates and electoral choices that are preferred by the voters in the rest of the electorate. This is, very complicated wording here. The methodologies for estimating group voting behavior as approved in applicable federal cases to enforce the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965 to establish racially polarized voting may be used for purposes of this section to prove that elections are characterized by racially polarized voting. So you don't really have to concern yourself too much with this, because this is really law that the court would follow in determining whether someone had violated the act. And we're not here as the Charter Review Committee to determine whether Santa Clara has violated the act. This is really something that the court would use.
I have another question about the district. So just as maybe a follow-on to Saskia's question about you have to reside in that district when you pull papers, and Rod, maybe you may know the answer to this, but the question is, does that person have to maintain residence within that district so long as they are representing that district?
So if somebody moves out of that district into another district, but still stays within Santa Clara, then they would not be eligible to continue service on council?
But after people have completed their term, sometimes people do move to other districts in order to run.
Yeah, but I'm saying like in the middle of it.
Correct. Okay, and then,
So can I ask a quick question? So hypothetically, if we go to districts and there is a council member who just was appointed, or just was elected, then they would automatically be the representative of that district. Would they be able to run again? Because our voting laws, we just voted the terms, which was 8 years. So if hypothetically we draw these and they are in their district, do they automatically, I mean, they have to run again?
no, I think we would still look at maintaining our same term limit rules, whether we had districts or not. So whatever we come up with as a charter amendment, I think we'll take into account the fact that we want to stick to our term limits.
So if hypothetically we had 3 council members, we go to districting, those 3 council members would all have to run in that district then? They'd have to run against each other, basically?
Well, the fortunate scenario that we have right now is that there's very few council members that will be running for another term.
Okay.
So this is actually a very good time to do districts if we're going to do it, because we're not really dealing with figuring out where sitting council members are versus all new people that might run within that district.
Are there any other questions? Are there any other questions on the California, the Voter Rights Act?
I still have some more slides if people want
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
more of it. But the Act further provides that an at-large method of election may not be imposed or applied in a manner that impairs the ability of a protected class to elect candidates of its choice or its ability to influence the outcome of an election as a result of the dilution or abridgment of the rights of voters who are members of a protected class as defined in the previous section. So basically what this means is if your at-large system results in a pattern of voting that leads you to believe that there's a misrepresentation of a protected class in terms of the voting results, this is kind of the heart of what you would have to prove for a Voting Rights Act violation. And then here is a violation of 14027 is established if it is shown that racially polarized voting occurs in elections for members of the governing body of the political subdivision or in elections incorporating other electoral choices by the voters of a political subdivision. Elections conducted prior to the filing of an action pursuant to the previous section and this section are more probative to establish the existence of a racially polarized voting than elections conducted after the filing of the action. So what that means is they look to previous elections and the results rather than any election that would have occurred after you filed the action. Again, this is something that a court would look at, not something necessarily you would look at. And this section.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Can you explain the difference between the Federal Voting Rights Act and the State Voting Rights Act? I mean, what's involved between the two of them?
Yeah. Essentially, the state has adopted the same kind of analysis of whether a violation has occurred. But with the State Act, there are certain state provisions that provide for certain what's known as safe harbors for a city that is being accused of a Voting Rights Act violation, and those are found in the Elections Code. And so what happens is, under state law, if you go to district elections following a receipt of a letter accusing you of a violation, then you basically fall within a safe harbor, and the lawsuit can't proceed, and the plaintiffs can't continue to collect attorney's fees if you said, you know, we're just going to go to districts.
Thank you.
So again, it's more analysis for the courts here about the looking at how you would determine a violation. So here's kind of an important issue, and that is the fact that members of a protected class are not geographically compact or concentrated may not preclude a finding of racially polarized voting or a violation of Section 14027 in this section, but may be a factor in determining an appropriate remedy. So what this is saying is, just because you're a city like Santa Clara that doesn't really have concentrations of minorities in one section of the city or another, that doesn't necessarily let you off the hook if your council is nevertheless all one ethnic group. And you don't have to prove intent, you just have to prove impact, disparate impact. And then other factors such as the history of discrimination, the use of electoral devices, or other voting practices or procedures that may enhance the dilutive effects of an at-large election, denial of access to those processes, determining which groups of candidates will receive financial or other support in a given election, the extent to which members of protected class bear the effects of past discrimination in areas such as education, employment, and health, which hinder their ability to participate effectively in the political process, and the use of overt or subtle racial appeals in political campaigns are probative but not necessary factors to establish a violation. So these are all factors that federal courts have considered in federal voting rights actions, and California just simply recites them in their statute as saying, you know, you can look at these, but they're not determinative. And then this is pretty wide-ranging authority for a court if they find a violation. Upon the violation, the court shall implement appropriate remedies, including the imposition of district-based elections that are tailored to remedy the violation. So it's not just district-based elections, but district-based elections are the one that is mentioned in the remedy.
Another question, please.
Sure.
With the state guideline for remedies, there have been a lot of lawsuits, a lot of cities, and I think all of them have been required to use, well, either they've decided or have been required to use the district method of voting. Is there valid options in not choosing that method? In other words, if we choose proportional or something like that, recommend that.
I haven't seen a court order that as the only remedy. It seems like the courts will only order district. They may order other things. I don't know. I mean, maybe someone else might know in the audience whether courts have ordered some other remedy. Okay. Without any districts. Okay.
What was that again? Can you repeat?
The gentleman over there, who I understand is an attorney who has studied this.
Correction, I am not an attorney.
Oh, you're not?
But I'm an
Okay.
expert on election law,
Okay.
and I have studied the various. My colleague, you're an attorney? I'm in sworn. Okay, fine. Anyway, yes, in federal cases, but not in California, federal cases, limited voting and
Okay.
cumulative voting have been used to settle voting rights lawsuits when the defendant jurisdiction has brought them forward. My understanding is the courts give deference to the defendant jurisdiction in discussing settlements.
And has that happened in places where you can subdivisions that could have had districts? Because I can understand that possibly working like you couldn't have districts, for example, in a state represented, like a state already has representative, a state house or something like that. And
I'm not sure I understand your question.
so what I'm saying is it's in a subdivision, in a political subdivision that could have districts. They said, no, you don't need to go to any kind of district, you can just do cumulative voting.
Well, the federal law requires that you be able to draw a majority-minority district
Okay.
in order to bring a course of,
Okay.
a cause of action. So there had to be the ability to do that, and yet the defendant jurisdiction said, we'd rather go to cumulative, we think it's better, and the courts have agreed. The Justice Department basically says, yes, you can do that, and they've accepted
And did
that.
those result in,
And so-
did those result in consent decrees?
I'm not sure if they result in,
There's about 40 jurisdictions in Texas that use a form of cumulative voting as a remedy for a Voting Rights Act violation. And in California, Santa Clarita and Highland were cases that were under the CVRA where an alternative voting method besides districts was considered and approved by a judge, but they weren't implemented at that time. And largely due because of legal implications, there were general law cities. So here, Santa Clara is a charter law city and can adopt an alternative voting system that is not a district-based remedy.
I'll be happy to speak to the Santa Clarita case if and when you want that information.
We're not here to necessarily examine what the violation, this committee's role is not necessarily to examine whether or not we would be subject to a violation of the California Voting Rights Act. This committee is here to decide what kind of charter amendment to recommend back to the council.
Happy to educate the committee on this area.
Thank you.
My question is, but we are kind of keeping the lawsuit as one of the reasons why we're looking at this, right? Because, and then the other thing is, if the state of California has only one safe harbor and it's districting, they've already made that quite clear, then if we went to districting and the council still wasn't diverse, then you're not solving the problem. I'm just very confused.
Well, we're not going to be able to, we'll never solve the problem of whether someone could sue us or not sue us, because all you need to sue somebody is walk into a courthouse with a piece of paper and put your money down. So people can always sue you. The question is what would avoid future lawsuits? As far as I know, even though if we look through the materials, I think it's something like 40 California cities now have district elections. Or it's 59, excuse me. So if you go to page 32 of the Common Cause handout, you can see that, a lot of cities have gone to district elections. And, and then I guess we're expected to have a lot more. So as far as I know, the cities that have gone to district elections have not been sued. Maybe they're still being sued, I don't know. But I haven't heard that any of those cities have been sued for Voting Rights Act violations once they've gone to districts.
So Brian, I understand that we're not to worry about the lawsuit aspect of this, but I would have to challenge that, because if we're going to make a recommendation to council without understanding the consequences of a lawsuit, we may make a recommendation to council and everybody else is looking at us going, did you even talk about the consequences of a lawsuit? Did you even discuss it? Was it even a factor in your decision? So honestly, I would like to discuss the consequences of a lawsuit. I'd like to understand what the ramifications are, because I don't think we can make a recommendation based on the reason we are here right now, based on what you said last week, is because we're being sued. And not to understand that whole process and what it entails, to me, feels like I'm not really doing my job. I'm looking at one slice of the pie. I'm not looking at the entire pie. So let's say hypothetically we decided to say, based on all of this, no, we don't want a district. And we go to council and we make a presentation. And all of a sudden somebody says, well, did you even factor in the lawsuit? Did you factor in what it would mean to the city? I think we should understand a little bit more about what that means. I don't think it needs to be a whole session, but I'd like to know a little bit more about what a lawsuit really means. What does it mean for us? And I'm not saying that as a chair, I'm just saying that as somebody who's, I'm just very curious as to what it means. Saskia?
I appreciate that, but I also appreciate the fact that if you have something wrong with a house, you can have somebody come in and have two different opinions, right? So we're going to have lots of different opinions on how the results are going to be. Or actually, Mary might have some other ideas on that, but you're not going to have the same opinion from, if you go to a dentist and one dentist will say one thing and how to cure something, and
I don't think I'm saying we shouldn't have different opinions. I think everybody should have an opinion as to what they feel. But what I'm saying is when it comes to the lawsuit, okay, and we're being sued, to be a charter review committee and not understand what the lawsuit entails, that doesn't mean you can't have your own opinion. I'm just saying that I would personally like to understand a little bit more about what this lawsuit means. Meaning, if it means, the precedent is $30 million, is that going to, I know it's not our decision, it's the council's decision ultimately, but I still think that we should have a little bit of that information. I would like a little bit of that information.
I can provide that information if you like. I mean, I can do it right now.
Okay, well, we'll go to Keith and Mary and then Hassam.
I guess
I'm sorry, Marcus. I meant Marcus.
I understand your point about wanting to understand the lawsuit. I think it's useful to understand what the possible consequences of the lawsuit would be. But the lawsuit, the purpose of the Voting Rights Act is to say government bodies should represent the people that they're supposed to represent. And the way to fix this problem, to keep us from being sued 4 years from now or 8 years from now, is to do something that makes it more likely that we will elect a city council that reflects the city. Going to districts may or may not do that. We could go to districts and 4 years from now, 8 years from now, 12 years from now, we could continue to have city councils which are not representative of the city or which are perceived to not be representative of the city. So to me, the goal of this committee should be to recommend something which will actually do what the law wants, which is to make the council representative. That might be districts, that might not be districts. In 2011, we could not draw districts that we thought would make it more likely that the city council would be any different than it is now, because we could not find districts that for the protected classes that are mentioned in the law would be any more likely to elect people that were their desires to represent them. And so I would like to understand the consequences of the lawsuit, but I would much rather.
That's all I'm saying.
I would like our recommendation to be something to actually fix the problem, not to put a Band-Aid or to go to districts, even if we don't think districts are going to work, because it'll kick the lawsuit 12 years down the pike.
Can I just answer the question that you asked? What would happen if you do not? The lawsuit exists right now, and the goal of the lawsuit is to get a court to order us to have districts before the 2018 election occurs. In other words, to have districts in place before 2018. So what would happen is if you don't recommend a solution that includes districts, the lawsuit will keep going on, and the lawsuit may even be concluded before June of 2018, and order the city, nevertheless, to go to districts. So any experiment you want to try by coming up with a system that doesn't include districts could end up with the court ordering us to go to districts anyway.
Okay. And so if the court ordered us to go to districts, would the city be responsible for paying the fees of the attorney that brought the lawsuit?
Yes.
Okay. If we go to districts before it goes to court, and I guess there was on something coming up where they were going to have their first hearing. If we decided that we would make the recommendation to go to districts and council approved it, would that attorney then continue to receive those fees?
I can't tell you that answer right now. I don't know whether he would agree to end his lawsuit or not. But we're looking at trying to limit continuing to go to the if we indeed go to districts, we're looking at using that as a way of limiting the viability of that lawsuit, such that we don't have to pay a lot of attorney's fees.
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Right. No, but the plaintiff's attorney in that case has indicated that he would not end that loss. He would not end his lawsuit with any other result other than a decision qualify us to go to districts.
Okay. And Mary?
I just wanted to echo some of what Keith said, but also say that I think that part of, like, if all we wanted to do was go to districts to solve the problem, we could like go home today and just do that, and that would be great. But you're right, Keith, that wouldn't necessarily solve the real purpose of the Voting Rights Act. And so I would argue strongly that maybe it's a both and. Maybe it's we look at a way to be in this safe harbor, because that's really helpful to us as a city. But that's not enough. That doesn't end the inquiry of like, how do we make sure that we can recommend things that will improve the likelihood that our city council will be representative of the community. We can do both. So that's at large. But I mean, it may be coupling a different voting method. It may be doing multi-member districts. It may be lots of different things that fit within the safe harbor and solve the problem of, like, to some extent, lawsuits will pretty much go away, and improve the likelihood of a more diverse council. It's not an either or.
Would that be acceptable to go to districting with other methods on top of it?
Yeah, of course. That's why we're here, is to explore all the options, and to get your best recommendation on how to proceed.
If it was acceptable to go to districting and then put on top of that other methods like cumulative voting and all these other things.
Right. Yeah. No, you should consider all the options.
Okay. Marcus?
Yeah, so I just find myself a little bit confused because sometimes I feel like we're here because of the lawsuit, and then we're told not to worry about the lawsuit, and then we spend time looking at these slides and told not to worry about them. And so, and even on Facebook, I don't remember if it was on Hussam Video's comments or unofficial Facebook page, but I've seen a lot of comments saying it sounds like we're here and being pushed, our districts are being pushed on us because of the lawsuit. And so I don't know, can we clarify that? Because I feel like we're wasting a lot of time trying to figure out what we're supposed to do about this lawsuit. I feel like, I agree with Tino, I feel like we do need to keep it in consideration and review it. But you know, this is my first time on a committee, but I don't know if this crazy about this, you know, particular item. But yeah, I just find myself really confused on what this lawsuit has to do with the committee. I mean, to me, like I said, I feel like it's the reason we're here, but then we're told not to worry about it. And I know like a lot of the public are also feel like districts are being pushed on us because of it. So this is a comment I wanted to say.
Thank you. Hussam and Saskia.
Do you mind going back a couple slides? I think it was, I wanted to look at something on 14028C. C? Oh, okay. So, and this is how I read it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Brian. It says the fact that members of a protected class are not geographically compact or concentrated may not preclude a finding of racially polarized voting. So that obviously applies to us. We don't have a geographically compact or concentrated neighborhood of protected classes. But it may be a factor in determining an appropriate remedy. So if I'm reading this correctly, which says, hey, if you don't have, you know, geographically compact neighborhoods of a protected class, it doesn't mean that you're exempt from this, but that may be a factor in determining that you may have an appropriate remedy like something else, like something other than districts.
That's true, but the remedy is for the court, not necessarily. I guess what I keep and I understand your frustration. Yeah, I hear what people are saying. We are here because council wanted, before a lawsuit was ever filed, we had already started the process to continue the conversation on should we change the way we elect council members. And council wanted it to be a representative group of people from Santa Clara, and they wanted to have a charter review commission. When the lawsuit was filed, we informed council that you can just put on the ballot. You don't need to have a charter review commission to put we're going to district elections on the ballot. Okay, they can just put a charter amendment right on the ballot. So they could have done that, but what they decided to do was keep this committee in place, to empanel this committee, and to have citizens, not them, look at it. It's better for the city that people who are not on the council are the ones making the decision about how to elect the future council. Even though most of the council members probably will not be running again, it's still better that people who are not currently council members, who are not as connected to the political process, being the ones to decide what we do in the future. So that's why this committee is here. I realize it's frustrating to be doing this in the context of having a lawsuit filed and pending against the city, but I'm just being honest with you. You have to understand that your work may be for naught if you do not go for districts. You may, the court there. It's possible that lawsuit, and the judge will be looking at all these factors, and you could try to psych out the judge and say, well, what if we do this and this and this? But ultimately, it's going to be the judge. If we don't go to districts, it'll be the judge who decides what method we go to, and more likely than not, if the judge does find a violation, the judge will order districts, because that's the way it happens most of the time. So I just have to tell you what would be likely. So I'm just letting you know that if you want, this is the context in which we operate. We didn't create this scenario. This is the world in which we live. A lot of other cities have been sued. Other cities are being sued, and most of them are dealing with it by going to districts. So I'm just letting you know that. You could nevertheless make a different recommendation, and it's possible that it's always possible for the city council to not follow your recommendation. This is how it works, but we really do need your input, and we really do want your thoughts, and we really do want your views as to what is the best way to do this. Knowing all that.
Saskia, go ahead.
I just want to speak to that so you understand, and those that are new. There are 6 of us here tonight that were on the last charter review, and Keith was on the one before that. But I don't know so much about Keith's charter review, but on our charter review, we had so much on our plate before the election that this particular area, we made a recommendation to the city council to have yet another charter review. So it's not because of the lawsuit we are here. That may account, I don't know the timeline on that, maybe Rod knows that or Brian does, but it's not why we are here. We personally instructed the city council that we recommend that a charter review be done purely to be intense on this topic. Now, that doesn't mean we can't talk about other things in time, but that's why. It's not because of a lawsuit, all right? I mean, that just happens to have happened, and it is what it is, and we just, we can address it the way Brian is suggesting, or we can just, address it how we, as citizens of this city, feel we are representing the citizens the best, all right? Does that help you a little bit? Okay, great.
And to that point, I think the council, because they've convened this commission, has said we could put districts on there and be done with it. If that's what they wanted to hear from us, then they wouldn't have put us together. They wouldn't have asked us to come together if all they wanted to do was for us to tell them to do what they're already going to do. And that's why I'm pushing back a little bit, is that I want the creativity from this group to look at all the different aspects. We understand we're getting sued. We understand what the lawsuit wants. But I think Keith said it best. We are here to determine what is best for our city, not what is best for the attorney suing us. And if we just simply sit here and go, well, gee, Brian, at the end of the day, we know what we need, and so let's just go districting and tell Lisa and the council next week we're going to go districting, that's not what they asked us to do. If that's what they wanted, they wouldn't have convened this. They are asking us to think outside the box. They are asking us to understand what the citizens want. They are asking us to understand what do we need, what does our city need going forward. And yes, they are asking us, how do we get better representation, because we are a very diverse city. But I'm not inclined to just lay down and go to districting because the lawsuit says so. Because if that's the case, I don't need to be here. And none of you need to be here. So I'd like to take that, I understand your advisement, I understand what the judge could say, but our job is to give the city council our opinion, Our job is to vet it. Our job is to give them something to think about, and then it's their responsibility to determine how they're going to move forward. So I want to be perfectly clear. That's why I want to understand the lawsuit, the consequence of the lawsuit, because I understand districting is going to fix it. Okay? Technically, supposedly it's going to fix it. But we're not here just to give the rubber stamp. So everybody, as you said, is going to have an opinion. Everybody should have an opinion. And you should have a strong opinion. And you should have a conviction for your opinion, even if it doesn't go your way or my way.
And I would say that you might be surprised your opinion that which you came in with is not the one you go out with. Because I found that on the last charter, there were opinions I thought going into it, well, I'm going to be like this. But by the end of it, I was very convinced on some issues very differently. And I was very grateful for the people that I was around. I got to learn a lot, and I came away with a lot. All right?
So Brian, this isn't, a pushback on you in a formal way, but I think the reason that we are here is to look outside of the obvious, to look outside of what we already know the precedent to be in other cities. And so I just really feel strongly about that, and I really felt like I needed to tell the group today that that's why we're here. Mary.
I just want to push back a little bit on Tino's point, only to say that I don't think that the push for districts is just about this lawsuit. It is also that there is a safe harbor in the statute, which would protect us against future lawsuits as well. And so, but again, I completely agree with you that that's not all we're here to do, and that we are here to solve the real, substantive question of how do we get a more representative council. I just think that it's important to note that it's not just that the lawyers in this lawsuit want that, it's that the state of California in the Voting Rights Act created a safe harbor for jurisdictions that choose a district election.
I mean, can I get clarification if we go to districts, 10 years from now, someone can look at what will be the next 10 years worth of elections, and if they don't seem to comport with the election of protected classes, the city can get sued at that point.
Again.
And there is no safe harbor at that point. There's no, well, you went to district, so you can't be sued, correct?
I think it's if you go to districts, it's much harder. If they lose a lawsuit, then what happens is all this democracy goes away, and the judge decides what your remedy is. And that was the argument I made to the attorney in the lawsuit. I said, he kept saying, well, you need to just pass an ordinance to go to districts. I said, well, we're a charter city. And he goes, well, you still have to do this. And I said, no. I said, we're a charter city. I happen to believe in democracy. And our charter says that, you bring a charter amendment to the voters, and that if we're going to remedy it, we'll remedy it through the democratic process. And so that's what this is about. So,
can I get clarification on that point? Because I read in the document, it says, beginning in 2017, new legislation will allow any size city to transition to by-district elections without a confirming vote of the electorate.
that's only if you're a general law city?
It doesn't say that. But you know that to be the case?
Are you reading the statute, or you're reading a discussion of the statute?
I'm reading the document that you sent out to us, the MDI.
Which one are you reading?
It's page 25 of their document, which I think was page 50 something. But it's their page 25. Because I was wondering if we could do all this work and then just have the city council come back and say, thank you very much, we're going by district, and be done. But not even put it to a vote.
They can do that anyway. You're just making a recommendation.
Right, but the way I understand it is it doesn't even need to go to the electorate.
Well, in Santa Clara, because we're a charter city, the state law can't amend the state constitution. The state constitution says that charter cities have elections according to their charters. Now, we did not adopt, we adopted our own method of election. We did not adopt the state statutes as our method of election, and therefore, if we're going to change the way we elect our voters, then we need to have a charter amendment to do that. Now, if we don't go to districts and the lawsuit persists and there's an election anyway, and the election results in an all-white city council, regardless of what method you choose, we will get sued again. And then the court may order us somehow to, I don't know, this is a new question of whether they can order a charter city to just amend its charter without an election. But
wasn't there also an issue with the court ordered a change, but the electric didn't approve that change? And then
there may have been a case like that as well.
It was a mess too, yeah.
And that could happen with you. You could recommend districts, and then the council could put it on the June ballot, and the voters don't pass it, and then we're in the situation of whether a court would then say, doesn't matter what the voters said, we still want to, we still order you to go to districts. It's possible. Well, I don't mean to be coy, but George Wallace claimed that, segregation was democracy as well. I mean, you in this context, it just doesn't matter if the results are such that you can demonstrate to a court that there was some level of violation of a protected class's rights. This is all very difficult stuff. The courts struggle with this.
Hassan?
Yeah, I mentioned this last week, and I'm going to mention it again in the context of what, some of the comments before me were, which is that I'm a little bit of an idealist, and the way I look at things is I believe we should do what's right and what we think is right for the city, and, our justice system, our court of law is there to ensure that, what's done is what's right. And so, personally, I've gone through the experience of a frivolous lawsuit, and I think Brian's absolutely right. Anybody can sue anybody or any entity for anything, and it's just going to have to, win or fail based on its merits or lack of merits. And so, if we, after vigorous debate and discussion, believe that the best way to achieve, a diverse council that represents the city is through through whether it's districts or something else, then that's our conviction and that's our belief, and we should stick to it and fight for it. The way I read Brian's comment, and maybe he can correct me if I'm wrong, by telling us not to think about the lawsuit, is that, again, anybody can sue anybody for anything, and it's good that we know the context, but let's not let it drive our decision. Let's decide on what we think is right, and then the city attorney's office will fight for the city, and based on our discussion, maybe from our debate, we'll find that districts actually may hurt the intent of the CVRA or what the CVRA intends more than it'll help, and maybe that could be used again. Maybe that could be used as part of the defense. But again, that's on the city attorney's office, and that's kind of how I read his statement, which is, let us handle the lawsuit. You guys handle in figuring out what's right. Which Saskia is right. We recommended this as the previous charter committee to reconvene independent of any lawsuit. So I'm not afraid by lawsuits. I've personally gone through through them, and at the end of the day, the merits will stand on their own. And I think that we have a great group of people here who care about the city and who really want to do what's best for the city. And I think if we just keep working with that mantra, we're gonna come up with something nice, and then hopefully our city attorney's office and our interim city attorney will be able to defend the city and what we collectively come up with.
Great. And it's also important that we're making a recommendation to council, and council will take our recommendation under advisement. So this isn't the end-all be-all. This is a recommendation that hopefully collectively we can say we have passion about this, we have conviction, and this is what we decided, and now it's up to you as a council to take it for what it's worth. Beverly, and then what I'd like to do is make a motion to extend the meeting, and here's why. Because there's at least 8 people here for public presentation, and I want to make sure that they That what?
Anybody in the parking garage? They close at 9, so I know like Rod recommended maybe at 8:45 for them to go move them.
So we should take a, can we make a motion to continue for at least, well, we're going to 9, but we have 20 minutes, and people are going to have to leave to move their cars, and so the public presentations, they may not be heard, everybody, and I don't want to do that. So either we do one of two things. Either we have public presentation now, or we take a break at 8:45 and make a motion to continue the meeting until at least 9:30 to 9:45. Because I don't want us to get to 8:45 and say, you know, sorry, but now public presentation can't happen, and I don't want to do that. So
I'd like to make a motion for us to take a 5-minute break now. We've been going for an hour and 25 minutes. People who need to use the bathroom or whatever can use it, and those who need to move their car can use the time now to move it.
Okay. Okay. Can we also make a motion to continue the meeting?
I'll make that motion.
And so to continue the meeting till at least 9:30?
Yes, make a motion to.
So Hossam made the motion, Keith seconded it. Is there any?
I have to go home
9:30.
That's fine.
Yeah, till 9:30.
Yeah, I mean 9:30 is the latest. Okay. All in favor? Okay, 5 minutes, guys. Move your cars. Do what you got to do. Okay, let's go ahead and reconvene. Brian, did you want to continue with the presentation? I know we got off track a little bit, but...
I think we were almost finished.
Okay.
And then this section just simply says that you get attorney's fees if you win. And we can't get attorney's fees unless we find the action to be frivolous, unreasonable, or without foundation. And I've never heard of that happening in this kind of a case. This is just simply saying it's in furtherance of the Constitution. And this says who can sue, and in our case, we did have a voter that is the named plaintiff. And that's it on the Voting Rights Act.
So are there any final questions on
The question is, and I don't know if this is absolutely true, and so maybe somebody can correct me if it's wrong. My understanding on the history of the genesis of the CVRA and why, it was, or how, not why, but how it was founded, was that some of the attorneys who drafted the legislation and who drafted especially the clause that said that they would be awarded attorney's fees, ended up being, founding law firms that went around the state and started suing districts and cities and municipalities.
I really couldn't comment on that. I just know that there are certain lawyers that do file a lot of lawsuits based upon the Voting Rights Act. I know it was originally passed, I think, around the year 2000. So it's been around a while. I think that
Thank you.
The recent amendments were designed to prevent attorneys running up legal bills if cities did decide to go to districts. That's why you typically have safe harbors, is to prevent lawsuits that are filed simply for the purpose of trying to win attorney's fees.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on, it looks like we're on item 4, review of the election voting methods of the City Council. However, Brian asked us for a preliminary direction to take that up. Do you guys want to take that up now, or do you want to go to number 4 first and then go to preliminary?
I'm not sure I have a preliminary direction that I would be comfortable with at the moment.
Okay. Okay, then let's proceed to number 4. Item 4, review of election voting methods of the City Council and the California Municipal Democracy Index.
Okay, so you have a very, very thorough review of the various types of voting methods in the handout that we gave to you in the California Municipal Democracy Index, and it gives you quite a bit of statistics about California cities. I think the best place to start is the fact that Santa Clara and Sunnyvale are the only 2 cities in the entire state that elect council members the way we do. So that puts a big target on our backs as being outliers, especially when we have city councils that don't represent ethnically our city. So just, it's just kind of an interesting little phenomenon, but it is nevertheless there. I think we counted up how many, Rania, cities that have gone to districts. It was 59, so which is quite a few, and most of them are the larger cities, larger or similar in size to Santa Clara. A lot of them are in Southern California, where you probably do have some racial segregation in the way people are living and voting. And then most of our larger neighbors in the Bay Area, San Jose, San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, all have district elections. So we are clearly an outlier in terms of not having districts for the size of city that we are. And then the other thing that the that the handout gives you is a brief summary of the different types of, the other types of voting, in terms of cumulative voting and ranked choice and plurality versus runoff. So unfortunately, I didn't bring my glasses today, so I can't really tell you the details of those different types, but essentially kind of the first question to ask is, you know, what's the difference between plurality and majority voting? And for example, in San Jose, in their district elections, they also have a requirement of you must win a majority of the vote to win. You must win 50% plus one to actually be elected to office. So the way San Jose does it is they put they have their, basically they have a general election in June along with the primary election, the state primary election, and if you win 50% in the June election, then you are elected to their city council. If you do not win 50%, then the top two vote getters are put into a runoff in the November election, and that then is the way they elect by a majority vote. So with only two, then you do get a majority. So that's one thing. That's one choice to consider. You could stick with the way we do it now, at large by seat, and then but simply require majority to win. You might want to look at what were the last results in the last election. I mean, how did those votes break down? Would the results have been different if we had a majority requirement to win? And it might well have been. We don't know because we didn't have the runoff, so it's hard to tell. You could speculate. There's different ways of looking at it, so you really wouldn't know. The other variant on the majority requirement would be to have the district election in November the way we do, and if you were not able to get a majority in that, then you'd have a runoff. Typically it's about a few weeks later, maybe in December, and you'd have a runoff. Apparently that's the way Louisiana does it. Like for their Senate race, they didn't have a majority and they had a runoff in December. I think there were some California cities that used to do that. I'm not sure how many still do it. And then the next variant on that is to have what's called instant runoff, and I always get this mixed up, and that is that's the ranked choice, right? So ranked choice is basically an instant runoff. So you basically select a first and second choice, 1, 2, 3. As many as there are, you just rank all of candidates, and then you just, I guess you just add that all up and see what would happen. No, you tell me how it works.
Quickly.
You sort the ballots out by first choice. If someone gets a majority of the ballots based on first choice, they win. If no one gets a majority, you eliminate the person who came in last, and then you look at all the ballots again. If your first choice is still in the running, your ballot stays with your first choice. But if your first choice was the candidate who was eliminated, then your ballot goes to your second choice. Now, if someone has a majority of all the ballots, you have a winner. If no one has a majority, lather, rinse, repeat.
Steve, I think you missed the one point, and that's why they're looking confused. It's the bottom person that gets counted off.
I said the last person, came in last.
They're the numbers that they look at. Only their numbers.
Oh,
after.
You're talking, every vote counts every round. That's why I explain it this way, because some people
Okay, say it
think
again, because I don't think they get it.
if someone gets a majority of, you sort the ballots out by first choices. If someone gets a majority of the ballots, then they win. If no one has a majority, you eliminate the person who came in last. Now, what you then do is you look at all the ballots again. If the first choice on the ballot is still in the running, your ballot stays with your first choice. But if your first choice was the person who got eliminated, your ballot moves to your second choice. Now, Saskia does bring up the point that in practice, you really only have to re-examine the ballots of the person who got eliminated. But that leads some people to think that those people get to vote more than once. That's not true. Everybody has equal voting power. Everybody's vote is equal. If you vote for a candidate who does not get eliminated, your ballot stays with that candidate until that person either gets elected or is eliminated. If you vote for someone who gets eliminated, your ballot goes to the next choice. Any questions?
Well, it's not a question, but an easy way to look at this is if there are only 3 people running and you need a majority and nobody gets a majority in the first round, so the person who got the least number of votes, if you voted for them, you'll say, well, who's your top second pick? Or who's your second top pick? And then that's basically exactly what's happening, but it can happen with as many candidates as there are running. This is just a simplified example with just 3 candidates running.
Right. Thank you.
And you asked about ties?
Okay. And then the other variant would be the cumulative voting. Would you like to explain that one?
Yes, actually, I've got a handout that I distributed to everybody in the break. And here's an example. I didn't bring sample ballots of actual use of cumulative voting, but I can do that. If you look at page 1, we have a jurisdiction with only 14 voters. There's 3 seats up for election, there's 6 candidates, and there's 5 voters in this community of the A persuasion and 9 of the B persuasion. And in an at-large election, you'd see that the B persuasion would have more voters. Everybody votes for 3. This is how you would do a normal at-large election. And the B people would, Bob and Barbara and Bill, would sweep the election. But in cumulative voting, everyone gets as many votes as there are seats up for election. So in this case, it'd be 3 seats, 3 votes. Everybody gets 3 votes. And you can distribute your votes in any fashion. All 3 on one candidate, 2 on one on another, or 1 for each of 3 people. And if the A people, if the 5 A voters each put each of their 3 ballots on one candidate, on Abigail, then Abigail is going to get 15 votes. And it doesn't matter how the B people spread their votes around the B candidates, Abigail is going to win a seat. And this is how electoral minorities, be they ethnic or otherwise, get fair representation. Now, if you move on to slide 3, you'll see one of the problems with cumulative voting. This is why we call it a semi-proportional system. If the electoral minority splits their votes amongst too many candidates, they're not going to get their fair share of representation. You'll see on page 3 how the Bs get all 3 seats. Also, if the majority faction plumps their votes for too few candidates, that's slide 4, they won't get their fair share of representation either. You'll see in slide 4 that the A's end up with 2 seats, even though they're the minority, and the B's end up with only 1 seat. So that's why we call this a semi-proportional system, because it allows for proportional results, but it doesn't guarantee them. Now, there's some question as to whether the current equipment can implement cumulative voting. I also sit on the Santa Clara County Citizens Advisory Commission on Elections, and I've asked the registrar's office to determine whether or not the current equipment can accommodate cumulative voting. But there's a related system called limited voting, which I've got on slides 5 through 8, where if you look at slide 6, what happens with limited voting, even though there's 3 seats to be filled, each voter only gets 1 vote. And this is also used to settle voting rights lawsuits. And you'll see that here I had increased the number of voters. We had 42 voters, 15 of the A persuasion and 27 of the B persuasion. And again, if you look at slide 6, if the A voters all vote for Abigail, she's going to win, no matter how the B people decide they want to vote. But limited voting also has the same drawbacks as cumulative voting. If you look at slide 7, if the A's can't agree on what candidate to support, they won't get any representation. And on slide 8, if the Bs all decide that, my goodness, Bill is so popular, everybody votes for Bill, they're only going to get one person, and the As are going to end up with two. But limited voting can easily be implemented with the current equipment,
I have no idea what he's talking about right now.
because after all, it's a vote for one election, and the current equipment can easily handle that. So I will know by our July case meeting, Citizens Advisory Commission elections, whether or not the current equipment can accommodate cumulative voting, and let you know about that. Any questions?
Sounds like they all have problems.
Well, the best is there's a cousin of ranked choice voting called single transferable vote, which Saskia is familiar with from being from Australia, which you're filling more than one seat. The instant runoff version of ranked choice voting, you're only filling one seat. But the multi-seat version of ranked choice voting, single transferable vote, you rank your candidates, and that will give you proportional results. And I'm not going to use up your time right now to explain exactly how the counting works, but it gets rid of the problem of a protected minority spreading their votes around too few people, because votes from bottom candidates will bubble up to the top, and it also prevents the problem of a majority faction from voting for too few candidates, because if somebody gets too many votes, their surplus will bubble down to more candidates. So that's a fully proportional system, but we don't have the equipment in this county to accommodate that. The earliest that we could get such equipment would be for the 2020 election cycle. It's part of the work we're doing on the Citizens Advisory Commission on Elections, but the county's put a hold on the RFP process for new equipment, so we will not be having new equipment by 2018. But something to consider is a phased approach, where you have a charter that says, well, we'll do limited voting until we can do cumulative, then we'll do cumulative until we can do single transferable vote, and then we'll do single transferable vote. So you can have that kind of a charter amendment. Speaking of charter amendments, you were worried about safe harbors for districts. You could have 2 districts of 3 members each, and you could conceivably have numbered seats within those 2 districts, and that would be a safe harbor against the CVRA. Because it's districts, it's not an at-large method as defined by the CVRA. It wouldn't result in solving the problem, and I don't know if it would stop a lawsuit that's in progress, but it would prevent a new lawsuit. I don't recommend that, because I'm a fan of proportional and semi-proportional systems, but that's something that you do need to consider.
Thank you.
Want to add to that?
I had one question. It's my understanding that there aren't any cities in California that use cumulative voting at the current time.
That is correct. It's used in many jurisdictions. I think my colleague here from Fair Vote knows more about that.
Yeah, it's been largely used as a remedy in a lot of Voting Rights Act cases that have arisen mostly in Texas to use cumulative voting. Yeah, that's 60 jurisdictions in the South. Yeah, I have some materials that I could bring next time or email to you as well.
Saskia?
No, you did it first.
That's true.
So, did you have more on this topic, Brian?
No, those are the different types. Those are the general types, depending on what you would like
I do have a
to
question.
know about each one of them. You know, we could answer questions.
Rod, I have a question for you. Do you see any issues with bringing something new to the voting system for us in particular? You know, how do we go about that as a city?
To Rod?
Yeah.
So there are 2 inherent elements to that. The first is having the registrar's office come in and make a presentation to you with regards to the viability of them actually implementing these with either their current technology or the vendors that they expect to bid on a type of contract that they would let, depending on what their RFP looks like. And that's a good foundational thing, just to understand what the viability of those are. With regards to changing to one of the alternative voting systems, you have an issue in that if a voting system is not familiar to a person who is just a rank and file voter, who isn't like somebody in this room who's really into democracy and will try as hard as they can to figure out how the election system works, if it's more convoluted, you may have voter fall off, where folks, if it's, vote for 1 out of 2, vote 3 times if it's an at-large seat, and they're going down their ballot, and all of a sudden they come to one where they have to use, ranked choice, accumulated voting, or something like that. You may in fact find folks who are not democracy junkies as we are here, who will simply skip that race, or only vote once because they don't understand how it works. So there are things like that where you've seen whenever you switch from one election system to another, you see an inherent voter fall off until you do education. What we would need to know is which system you guys are looking at, if you're looking at an alternate voting system, to know how much resources with regards to, frankly, voter outreach and dollars and marketing materials and all the rest you would need to do really intense voter engagement to explain what that system was, and that may be part of the conversation.
Can I add to that, in the school district, we have these seats, but it's vote for 2, and we've been doing this for 50 years or something, and people still don't get it that you vote for 2. And if you look at the seat that's a vote for 1, and then the seat that's a vote for 2, you should see twice as many votes, and you don't. You see the same, maybe 1.5 times. So there's a lot of people who either are on purpose, but I think a lot of them just not on purpose. They don't read the ballot carefully, and they don't pay attention. And so if we do something that's really different, Rod's going to have to do a whole lot of outreach and training, and people still aren't going to get it, just because they're not going to pay attention to it. And the other thing I want to comment on was every time you do an election, it costs us money. And if you do something different, it costs us more money. So if we ask the registrar to do something that's unique, we're putting up the money, is my understanding for that. And if we want to do a general election in November that's a majority and nobody gets the majority, so you do a runoff in December or January, we are paying 100% for that extra election. So that's hugely expensive. So you gotta think about the costs of what you're doing as well.
Well, you know my opinion on that, though.
Chair Silva, may I? Yeah, please. I want to remind folks that this is something that we've discussed now 3 times in the city of Santa Clara. As we work through all this and look at the general pros and cons with regards to voter familiarity, the ability of the registrar's office to actually implement the system, and the ability of candidates to be able to seek office each election cycle, Mary Hannah Weir's earlier idea with regards to multi-member districts may in fact have a sweet spot between where all that kind of convenes. And a multi-member district would be one where, say, instead of having 6 districts, you have 3 districts. A city council member is elected in the presidential election cycle, and then a city council member is elected in the gubernatorial election cycle. That would allow somebody the option to run for council every 2 years and not have to wait. It gets rid of the mini mayor system to some extent in that you've got 2 council members from each district. It allows you access to more than one person if you live in the district and would like to have an open ear. There are a whole lot of unique things to that system that may be just in general the confluence of the least harm with the most benefit if you have to change the system, knowing that it would still be a district election and therefore may still qualify for the safe harbor in the California Voting Rights Act. What we'd need to hear from the city attorney is whether or not a multi-member district actually meets the safe harbor clause, or if it has to be a single member district, and that I don't know. But Ms. Hannaware is correct, as were many members of the previous Charter Review Committee who had initially discussed that before we moved on to other topics.
Thank you. What I'd like to do is, I don't think we're going to get to the preliminary direction tonight, so I'd like to table that. What I'd like to do to wrap up is propose 3 things. First, that we have a real quick overview of 2011, 2015. I have the notes, the recommendation from 2011 I can share real quick because I have it on my computer. Bev can, or Keith, you're more than welcome, you were on there. And Beverly can give a synopsis of what we did in 2015 or 16, real quick. And then I'd like to go to public presentations. What I think might be useful is towards the end of this, I started to hear solutions. I started to hear options, like maybe we district, maybe we don't, but there were a number of different ways of voting. and I'd like to explore that a little bit more, because I'll be honest with you, some of the stuff just went over my head, and I'm looking at this presentation, I don't know A plus B equals C, I was horrible at algebra, and I'm horrible at this, but I'd actually like, some feedback on whether or not you would like to hear more of the different ways we can vote, right? So we know that districting, we know the safe harbor, right? And so we get that piece. But what can we do within the districting that would resolve the issue that we are looking at right now, if that makes sense?
I would love to do what Husam did last time, was where we all voted on something and then they tallied it up and showed us the difference.
Right. But I think before we can get there, we need to really understand what each one is. So we know what we're voting for.
Right.
And then from there, we can do what,
Do
that was
again.
brilliant, what we did
That was
last
brilliant.
time.
I
So
think it'd be great for those that haven't done that before.
So I'll work it out with staff on who can present these various methods, because there were a lot of different methods that I started to say, oh, okay, I didn't know we could do that, I didn't know we could do that, I didn't know we could slice the pie this way. So perhaps we can come up with something that does address this ongoing lawsuit and this court-mandated what may happen down the road, but that we also look at, okay, we got that part figured out. Now, how do we figure out how to vote so people are properly represented? And maybe that's phase 2.
I would like to know more about what Mary discussed.
Yeah. So I'd actually like to put that on the next agenda, not discuss it tonight because I think we're going to run out of time. And Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think it'd be great to learn about multi-member districts, which is the thing that I was mentioning earlier. Also, it'd be nice to hear about, like, sort of with the different kinds of voting methods, the pros and cons in a district situation,
Yes.
the pros and cons in an at-large situation, and if they're, if they've been used, and I know that we may or not, we don't know that, like, literally right now, but it'd be great to have some.
If we cannot, in fact, have a type of voting in the county, it doesn't make sense to even discuss it.
Agreed, so we should probably figure that out first.
Okay, yeah, let's figure that out first before we spend a lot of time on it.
Right.
Love that
But-
idea.
Because what I'm getting the sense of is that there is a way to district, okay? And there are numerous ways to vote. And so, if I'm thinking best case win-win, how do we address the lawsuit issue so we are not continuously getting sued and we meet the requirements, but then how do we make it unique to Santa Clara so it suits our needs and what we need it and how we need to vote in order to assure that what we're doing is fair across all different boundaries. And so for next meeting, I'll put on the agenda. First, I'd like to, I'll work with staff, and any methods that you have, please send them to Rania, because she's the gatekeeper. If there's any of that you've come across or you want to be put on there, and then we'll take a look at and discuss a lot of what we talked about tonight, and then we'll get a list of maybe 4 or 5 different voting methods, and we'll look at those voting methods in 2 ways, one at large and one at districting. And so that way we may look at 10 different, but we're really looking at 5 and breaking it down each one into 2. And then I think from there, we can get a sense of what we feel comfortable with based on our conviction or belief or what citizens are telling us or whatever the case is. And then we can go to something similar to what we did the last charter review, which is where we went and ranked. And we had a very, I don't want to call it an algorithm, but to me it was. It was an Excel spreadsheet, but it was such that we were able to rank everything, so it was weighted fairly. And then from there, we would look at what are the methods that are most acceptable, and we rank them from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then from there, we maybe take the top 2 or 3 and then have that discussion. And then from there, we would vote again, and then based on that, that's what we would begin to piece our presentation and our conclusion to council. Okay, so if that's okay with everybody, if there's anybody that disagrees or wants to do something different, let me know because it's going to take a little bit of work. I'm going to be in Singapore, but I don't care. You might get an email at 4 in the morning, and I'm like, why aren't you responding? But nevertheless, you know, I'll do whatever I have to do to work with staff and all of you to put this together, because I think next meeting, that's the crux of it. I think we have a lot of really good stuff. I think we understand the districting piece. I think now we understand the lawsuit and the consequences of the lawsuit and what the lawsuit is asking us to do. And now we begin to figure out solutions as how do we go about remedying this lawsuit, not just this time around, but down the road. Okay.
I would just add, if you want to look at the pros and the cons, and also if we have the, you know, the means to even do that kind of voting, I would also recommend that you put in there the ease of use, because I think, you know, if you're going to change something, it has to be something that the voters can understand. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Hussam?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that in your chronology of things that we need to do, I actually agree with what Brian said, which is at some point, immediately after we discuss the 10 options or whatever, you know, the 5 options and at-large and district flavors, that we hear from the registrar office to see what is feasible in the immediate term and what is feasible down the road. That's the first comment. And then the second comment is, you know, because you mentioned the kind of the spreadsheet and algorithmically, I mean, as a committee, it's important for us to know not exactly the nuts and bolts of how things work, but what implications does that algorithm have on the outcome. And then from a voter's perspective, they don't need to know how the math works. They just need to know, I'm going to rank 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or I'm going to put, you know, 2 votes here and 1 vote there, or 3 votes here and 0, or I'm just going to vote for 1 per district. They just need to know how to fill out the ballot, which can be difficult to, you know, educate them, but they don't need to know necessarily the algorithm or the math behind how all this works. So, I mean, that's just something for us as a committee that we go in there saying, wow, that's really complicated math. Well, none of us are going to do that. The registrar's computer systems do that, right? So it's just for us to, you know, it's just a caution for the committee, because even as I did that last year, I was using the same software that Cambridge, Massachusetts used, which they open sourced for free, and they were the very first city in the United States to do ranked choice voting, and they made their software for free, and that's exactly the software that I used last year. So it's
I was actually giving you props. I thought you.
I know. I appreciate that. No.
Now I know that somebody else did. So.
I won't take credit for work that I didn't do. So.
But yeah, it did feel like an algorithm at the end of the day, and now I realize that it really is.
It is.
So let's do this.
Can I just make a quick comment?
Yeah, please.
I just really feel I need to insert myself after you made the comment that the voter doesn't need to know what they're doing. The voter absolutely needs to know what they're doing. They have to know what the consequences of how they choose. That's the essence of this entire enterprise.
I hope that's not what I said, or that's what it was interpreted. What I was saying was the voter doesn't necessarily need to know the math behind how the tally is calculated.
But they need to understand that how their vote is ranked will affect who gets elected.
Exactly.
Absolutely, they need to know that.
What I heard Hussam say is that whatever goes on in the background with the county and how they calculate it, people don't need to know how they calculate it. People need to know, how many people should I vote for? Or how does it work?
They need to know what will be the effect of my voting in this way. You know, who is more likely to win if I vote this way? They need to understand that for it to be effective in remedying
but
the
at a
situation.
very high level. They don't need to go into the minutiae
I
that he's
think
saying.
they need to understand exactly how the vote will work.
They need to know. They do need
They do need to know, but what I heard Hussam saying was they don't need to go into the minutia of how it all, and all the algorithms and everything else about how it works. They need to understand what their vote means and how it's going to be calculated and so on and so forth. But I think he was just taking it a step further, which was, you know, if they use a Massachusetts whatever formula.
I think we're saying the same thing. All I was trying to say was that even as we did it last year as a committee, there were people who were interested in literally the mathematical formula for how it was done, and what I was trying to communicate was, you don't need to know the exact, you know, mathematical calculations, but you do absolutely need to know that if you swap your 3rd and 4th rank, it may affect the outcome, and they need to know that, and they need to know how to vote appropriately based on their preferences. I mean, that's absolutely important. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. So let's move forward, and let's get a quick,
So you made a decision, does the public
this part,
What decision did we make?
that you're moving forward with what you just said. You're violating the Brown Act by
We're
not
setting-
allowing the trust.
Okay, so we're actually setting the agenda for, okay, well, we didn't vote on it. We just agreed that that would be what we would do go forward.
Violating the Brown
Okay.
Act by not allowing the public to speak on everything on the agenda, and it's right here in the book you just handed out.
Okay, well, then we can talk about it after the meeting. We're going to move forward, and we're going to move forward with the overview from 2011.
In 2011, the committee made 2 recommendations.
Kevin, can I interrupt? Are we gonna, are we gonna run out of time for
Nope.
public presentation?
Nope.
Okay.
We'll be fine.
I thought you said we had to stop at 9 in order to.
9:30. We're going to stop at 9:30.
Okay, but we've got enough time?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'll be very quick.
This will
We
just be
made
like a
2
2 or 3
recommendations.
minute.
The one that had the most support, essentially almost everyone in the committee, was to look at, was for the council to consider a method of proportional representation. We didn't specify which one in particular because there were a lot of questions about what the registrar of voters would be able to accommodate in the election, and there wasn't a pressing lawsuit to where we thought we had to act right away. The second recommendation, which got less support in the committee, was to move to an at-large system where, say, every 2 years, if there were 3 council seats up, you would get to vote for, you'd get 3 votes, and everyone would run on the same ballot, and the top 3 vote getters would have gotten elected. So essentially, do away with the seat notion we have, but maintain the at-large part of each election. I think that recommendation would not comport with the CVRA lawsuit, because I think we would still be at large. The proportional one is not districts, so it would not directly address what Mr. Doyle has said we need to do.
Okay, thank you.
If anyone has any questions, I'm glad to go into more details, but.
Go ahead, Beth.
2016 committee, we didn't make a recommendation on this particular topic because when we started to meet, we had 17 members. It was really hard to get a lot of things done. It was a topic that required we wanted a lot of information. So we decided, because of the deadline that we had to get to the council, any ballot recommendations, we weren't going to be able to give it justice. We decided to go and look at other things that they had directed us to do, which was to look at the salaries and look at other aspects of the charter. So, but the recommendation to them at the end was to have a focused charter review, as we are today, to just look at this issue. And that's how we left it at our review.
Awesome, thank you. Any questions, real quick? Okay, we're going to go to public.
I have a question to Keith on 2011. Is that okay?
Yeah, quick.
It's a real quick question. So when you guys, the second preference, which was to go an at-large by no seat, was the discussion then that even that was better than the by-seat at-large that we have today? So that, I mean, you're not just changing it for the sake of change, but you said that even an at-large as a whole is better than at-large by seat.
I don't want to speak the whole thing.
No, but I mean, yeah.
That was the thought, that it would have done away with some of the. Sorry. It would have alleviated some of the weirdnesses that, since people choose what seat to run for, they can pick their opponents and not pick their opponents, and you have the situation where if you really like 2 people and they're running for the same seat, you can only vote for one of them. You would like to vote for the 2 people you really like and have those 2 people get elected, and if you get 3 votes and you vote for your 2 people as your 2 votes and for someone else, then plausibly both people you supported would actually win. Whereas in the current system, sometimes yes, sometimes no.
And Keith, were you looking at CVRA at that point, or were you just looking at, you didn't like the seats? When, in 2011, was the issue of CVRA really in the forefront, or was it just, you didn't like the idea of how
it wasn't at the forefront the way it is now. I think the city had been alerted that maybe, I think the same person was going to sue the city, and so the council put together the Charter Review Committee to look at what the options would be to proactively change to something else before a suit is filed?
Okay. Thank you. So we're going to go to public presentations. I will say the comment from the public about the Brown Act, I'll take under advisement with City Council, with the City Attorney. If the meeting needs to be run differently, then I'll take his advisement. Okay? I'm going to allow 3 minutes for public presentation because we have, it looks like 5 people here. They can each have 3 minutes. And you guys can start any way you want. Whoever wants to go first. If you guys want to come up front, that's fine. If not, you can.
Well, I want to be in the
behind us.
best place for the cameras.
Are you running for council? That sounds like somebody's running for council. Okay, your time is starting now.
Thank you. First off, I want to thank the city attorney for giving me the opportunity to comment on things other than during this period. I really urge that you consider allowing public comment on every informative item. By prohibiting public comment on informative items, you deny the public the opportunity to correct any misinformation you may receive at the time you receive it. For example, and this is a trivial example, and I'm sorry that that slide went away, but the California Voting Rights Act is part of the Elections Code, not the government code. Cambridge, by the way, was not the first city to use single transferable vote to elect their city council. But see, that's another piece of misinformation that you get when you deny the public the opportunity to correct misinformation, whether it come from staff or whether it come from a member of the committee. So I really urge you to reconsider that decision. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, my name is Steve Chesson. I'm president of Californians for Electoral Reform. I'm a nationally recognized expert on alternative electoral systems.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Hi, good evening. Thanks so much. Oh. I've got a few.
This is your 5 minutes of...
Thanks so much. My name is Pedro Hernandez. I'm the Deputy Director of Fair Vote California. It's an electoral reform. Fair Vote California is part of Fair Vote National, which is the nation's leading organization that studies electoral reform and representation methods. You know, it's wonderful that you're all gathered here working on this issue. Unlike other cities who are moving very quickly to adopt a district map, you have the opportunity here to really shape what your voting system and election system may look like for the city of Santa Clara. I wanted to just talk about a few things. Under AB 350, the safe harbor provision that was referenced a few times earlier, it specifically states that a city must adopt an ordinance to decide to move to by-district elections only. And that's the only remedy available under the safe harbor provision. The way it's outlined in the elections code, it essentially implies single-member districts, unfortunately, because it says a candidate through a political subdivision. And it may do so by ordinance. And there's issues regarding charter, whether or not a city's charter basically trumps the voting system by ordinance. So essentially, if your charter city outlines that you must put out to the vote of the people, then that would be the governing, the correct method of approaching that issue. So your charter would trump that. I wanted to speak very quickly. You know, generally, I'm probably going to go over, but I want to make myself available. My email is pedro@fairvote.org. I have cards, and I have studied these elections issues in the past. I worked in private practice on these issues for about a year. Regarding single-member districts, yeah, I'll have a lot to say, but you know, there's a city of Fremont is moving quickly through AB 350 under the claim that it had experienced a voter dilution of Latino voting power, and their district remedy essentially only allows for 20% of Latino citizen voting age population to be in each corresponding districts. That's not even a opportunity district or an influence district. That's a very low threshold. And here you have the opportunity to actually explore, because unlike Fremont, which is a general law city, you are a charter city, and you can choose to adopt an alternative voting system. Further, the language of the California Voting Rights Act actually is broad enough to allow for alternative voting systems to take place as a remedy. And that was made pretty intentionally if you look at the legislative history. And any method that you choose to pursue will have an education component to whatever you do. Any method that you choose.
I got it.
But I will add that regarding ranked choice voting, San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland, San Leandro all use ranked choice voting to elect single members voting. And in that, if you actually, there was a study done that we did. If you look at the error rate of overvotes and undervotes from the years 2000, 2003 in San Francisco, it was about 13.5%. However, when you looked at under ranked choice voting, overvotes and undervotes combined averaged 9.5, so it was slightly lower. So just something to consider.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Debbie, you want to go? Debbie, you can go.
Back to my original comment, not allowing the people to vote on every item is a direct violation of the Brown Act. So I will be putting in a request to cure and correct for everything that's happened tonight and have that not happen again in the future because you are in violation. Okay, so as you look at correcting this, I hope it's finally been clarified that we are looking at curing the problem, not just talking about a lawsuit, because I think, one, they are not the same thing. And I think we're dealing in a level of ignorance if we just keep saying the lawsuit, the lawsuit, the lawsuit, because that isn't going to solve the representation problem. So, and I'm with you, Marcus, when we keep saying, don't worry about the lawsuit, and then we keep bringing up, you got to fix it by doing one type of voting. So the contradiction just keeps going on. We need to clarify that or stop contradicting ourselves. The question I wanted to ask that would have been nice to have answered while we were talking is, we didn't take it to the point, well, what if the voters say no? And that wasn't answered while we were talking about, this is a charter city and it goes to the council. No, it wasn't.
Say no to what?
The recommendation goes to the council, and then the council puts it to the voters, and then the voters vote on it. And if the voters vote no,
We could be sued again.
we can be sued again.
It was
But
answered. It was answered.
then what happens again? It gets sued again, we get told
It
what
starts
to
all
do.
over again.
Whatever. That
Yeah.
was what I was trying to find out, and there was no
That's
reason
kind of
I shouldn't have been able
obvious,
to. No, it's not obvious.
Oh, I think it is.
Well, you're taking my time,
No, no,
and
go
I'm
ahead.
still talking.
Don't worry, I got you.
Okay, the other thing, it'd be nice to know if the numbers of disproportional representation is based on the number of registered voters or the population. Because we have a large population of minorities that aren't registered voters. So I would like to have that question answered too. Is that what it's based on? And which direction is that swinging? The fact of educating, that's what your your elections officer is going to have that responsibility no matter what happens, and it shouldn't change which method you do. That is that person's responsibility. That's what they're paid for. That's what they have to do. Whether people get it or not, that shouldn't be a concern of this group at all. The other thing is, I think that this group should even consider, what if you thought about counting the votes by hand? To hire people to sit down in rooms and have an old barn raising situation and count the votes ourselves, to set up our own people. This is a center of what's possible. If we really believe in proportional voting and the county's behind the dime, what if we did it ourselves? If we believe it, we could make it happen. So I think just because the county doesn't have it, I don't think that should stop you either. So please think out of the box. And the other thing is, the alternate methods should go beyond just voting methods. For example, I don't think you're going to start seeing more minorities unless we get rid of some of the good old boys and good old girls. And I think that has a lot to do with how much money goes into it. So I was at the ethics committee the other day, and they're looking into dark money. I think we also need to look into how much money we allow people to spend on these campaigns. It's obscene how much money we spend. So let's look at other things beyond just, let's really, if you can, focus on other aspects that may open it up to other people that are new to our city, to make it more welcoming for people to participate. And a lot of time, let's face it, it is money. Because if you don't have a big checkbook, a large following, aren't independently wealthy or self-employed, it's very difficult to run in this city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, my name is Ben. I'm a resident of the city. I just came by because I find this subject very fascinating, and I have to say I find the meeting fascinating. You guys are all doing great. Just some things I was thinking of when the meeting was going on. Ranked choice or single choice verbal vote is really the preferred method for voting. I remember doing this in school. We had a school club that did this. It is a bit complicated to head around, but it is actually mathematically provable to be better than single districts or really almost anything because of the way just the math works out in it. If you guys do end up doing some kind of hybrid where you have a districts, maybe 3 districts, 2 votes, I did want to comment on there's a big difference in multi-seat districts between 2 seats that are elected independently with the full electorate versus the top 2 vote getters getting 2 seats, because when you have 2, basically the second place gets a seat, but they aren't, the people who get first place kind of pulled out of it. You're actually getting minority, the minority candidate who gets elected, versus if you have basically 2 elections in the same district, it's actually a significantly, it's basically the same thing as having a full district or a bunch of small districts. They aren't really, you aren't getting a benefit from the way the vote's happening. This wasn't addressed here, and I'm assuming it's going to be addressed in the future, but if you guys do go to districts, you should really look at, on districting, using some kind of algorithmic districting system, which is basically you draw the lines based on some kind of mathematical formula, something like the shortest line, or you find a formula that says the distance, minimize the distance from any voter from their district. You do that, and you avoid having to have a meeting, having this meeting again every 10 years, every 20 years, because people move around the city. So I'm hoping when you guys get to that, it'll be considered. It is something that is good. This is fascinating. I hope I'll be able to find time to come out and listen to you guys in future meetings. Thank you.
And if you're interested in drawing those districts, let us know. Once you see the demographics, you're probably going to never come back to this meeting. Just kidding. Sir.
My name is Dave Kadlacek. A lot of what I was going to say was already said by others, both members of the committee before the public presentations began and other members of the public, but also I'll try not to repeat too much. One is regarding lawsuit and lawsuits. From what was told to the Charter Review Committee last year and in other contexts, it's pretty much a sure thing and easy to show almost anywhere, and definitely in Santa Clara, that racially polarized voting went on, so that the real question is what is the best remedy, not whether or not the city is going to be able to show that there's no violation of the CVRA. So the thing to do is to find something that's a remedy that actually works or has some hope of actually working, and probably also one that gives some safe harbor against potential future lawsuits. Second thing on the public comment stuff, whether or not the Brown Act requires comments on everything listed on the agenda, you are making decisions when you're saying, let's look at this next meeting, have the staff come in, gather together information on that, even if you don't actually have a motion and a vote. So if you're doing that, that's a decision that the public needs to be able to provide input on. Third thing is when you're looking at voting methods for city council and districts versus not districts, you should also look at the size of the council and the length of terms. That affects some of the things that you have as pluses and minuses. I mean, if there's larger council with more members, then it's more likely that you might be able to draw districts that do various things that you might want to do regarding representativeness. If you switch to 2-year terms instead of 4-year terms for everyone, then basically it's more often that people would have a chance to vote, and the negatives of not being able to run so often don't come. The last thing is where Hossam was correct about Cambridge being the first. There were a bunch of other cities that used ranked choice voting in the 1920s and 30s, and they started around that time and still kept on using it into the computer era. So I believe they were the first to use a computer to count their ranked choice voting elections. Things were counted by hand in New York and Cincinnati and so forth in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. But Cambridge went into the computer era, I think in the 70s or 80s. Someone else might. Oh, 1990, they still did it by hand through the 70s and 80s. And, okay, well, anyway, that's it.
Thank you. I still believe you, Hussam. I'm kidding. Is there any other,
I have a question. This charter can't look at money on campaigns. That's not part of the charter, right?
That's not part of the charter.
Okay. So I want to thank everybody. I know this was a long night, but I think I really feel like we're at the crux now of being able to start really kind of formulating some strong opinions. So we kind of got over the hump. So thank you for being on time. Thank you for the public for being patient, and thank you for your input. Yep.
Motion to adjourn.
And so we're going to adjourn 2 minutes early. So if there's a motion to adjourn?
Yes, there is.
Thank you. And Keith seconded. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you.